Weezing is my favorite poison type in the Pokemon series, and among my favorite Pokemon of all time, which might sound a little strange. Weezing seems pretty basic and forgettable, and in most generations it's not very good competitively either. But to me, Weezing is the quintessential poison type, and in my favorite generation, Gen 3, Weezing is the only mono poison type in the entire game that actually functions well in competitive. In a world where most agree that poison is the worst type in the game, Weezing defies the odds and takes full advantage of its modest, unappreciated typing. Weezing may not be ranked OU in Gen 3, but it is one of the most commonly used UUBL Pokemon in high-level play, with some truly unique advantages offered by nothing else in the game, and it is a very customizable Pokemon with a fantastic move pool. Let's take a look at this rare situation where Weezing was a great choice in competitive Pokemon. But first, it appears that the future Paradox form of Rotom Frost, Iron Frigilus, has once again coerced me into interviewing a fellow YouTuber. Moxie Boosted is a Pokemon competitor, content creator, and a scientific genius with a deep knowledge of physics. We had an amazing conversation on my podcast, The Fridge, about a variety of topics, and I would urge you to check it out. Thank you. Poison types are in a very unfortunate position in Gen 3 OU. Ground is the worst weakness you can have in this metagame because of Dugtrio. Dugtrio's ability Arena Trap is legal in Gen 3, and this Pokemon can very easily trap and eliminate anything weak to ground with its Stab Earthquake. Some types can make up for this, like the Steel and Rock types who have other advantages, but Poison does not have a lot going for it. Immunity to Toxic and resistance to Fighting are solid traits, but offensively, Poison typing is extremely lacking. Poison is super effective against only one other type, Grass, and the most common Grass type in the game is Celebi. Celebi is a Grass Psychic type, and Psychic is super effective against Poison. Steel types are also completely immune to Poison attacks, and Steel types are absolutely everywhere in Generation 3. Two of these Steel types have a Steel Psychic type combination, meaning they can easily threaten you with super effective stab damage. Psychic weakness is generally not fantastic in a world where many of the top tier Pokemon happen to be Psychic types. But Weezing is able to overcome the Poison type's greatest downfall with one simple trait, the ability Levitate, which grants an immunity to ground. With this amazing ability, Weezing is totally safe against Dugtrio's Arena Trap effect and all ground type attacks. And he is immune to the damage of spikes, which is extremely valuable. Weezing is also more effective at utilizing its Poison type attacks than most fellow Poison types, because of another tool at its disposal, Will-O-Wisp. This is among the best status afflicting moves in the game, and an incredible tool to have access to. Will-O-Wisp directly applies burn to the enemy, which deals 1/8 of their HP every turn and halves their physical damage output. This can be a difficult move to switch in against. Only fire types are immune to burn, and fire types are rather uncommon. The two most common fire types in the game, Moltres and Charizard, don't love coming in against a potential Sludge Bomb either. This will deal solid stab damage to them and has a 30% chance to apply poison. The Steel types that are immune to Poison type damage are also really afraid of coming in and getting burned, which will permanently cripple them for the entire game. This is particularly devastating against Skarmory and Metagross. Skarmory really needs its chip healing to stay healthy long term, and burn removes that. Metagross relies heavily on its physical damage output, so taking a burn is basically a death sentence. This simple combination of Will-O-Wisp and Sludge Bomb puts enemies in a really awkward position. The threat of Will-O-Wisp dissuades common Poison type answers from switching in, and therefore enhances the effectiveness of Sludge Bomb. And with this support, Sludge Bomb actually feels like quite a strong option. It deals respectable damage, and that 30% poison chance really comes in handy. Weezing's high defense stat, great defensive ability, and utility options like Will-O-Wisp mean it can function very well in a defensive role. Very few Pokemon in Gen 3 can match the sheer physical bulk of Weezing. This Pokemon particularly helps out against fighting types. With a resistance to their stab attacks and the ability to shrug off weak coverage moves such as Shadow Ball or Rock Slide, Weezing is perhaps the strongest fighting type counter in the entire game. Weezing also helps out a great deal against Snorlax. You can shrug off their physical damage and cripple them in various ways, such as with Will-O-Wisp and Taunt to deny them from using Curse or Rest. Pain Split is commonly used on defensive Weezing sets, a very interesting move that will average the health of both Pokemon and then set each of your health stats to that amount. This can be a way to heal whenever your own health stat is lower than the enemy's, and it is a fantastic way to punish high HP opponents like Snorlax and Blissey. Speaking of Blissey, defensive Weezing sets can be very effective against this powerful Pokemon, if they happen to be running Toxic as their only status move of choice, which is common. You are completely immune to poison and can threaten them significantly with your physical damage. Taunt denies their healing, and Pain Split punishes their high HP. Haze is another useful utility move that can come in handy on defensive sets, a move that resets the stat changes of all Pokemon on the field. Some sets also use Hidden Power Fighting instead of Sludge Bomb as an additional point of insurance against Tyranitar. But Weezing is not just limited to a defensive role, it also has some really fantastic offensive tools. Most notably, Weezing has access to the much coveted Explosion, an incredibly powerful move in Gen 3. Explosion causes the user to faint, but deals damage with an effective 500 base power. If a Pokemon faints in Generation 3, it denies their enemy from taking a turn, adding to the value of this move. Thanks to Explosion, Weezing can go out with a bang, earning value by spreading burn or dealing some damage, and then using Explosion to trade with an important enemy, putting you at a massive advantage. Weezing can even act as a special attacker if you need it to. Weezing will sometimes use Fire Blast and Hidden Power Grass for that classic Fire Grass coverage combination. You can turn defense into offense, taking advantage of your great defensive properties to hit the field and start posing a huge threat from there. This kind of offensive Weezing can be a great switch in to Skarmory since you're immune to Toxic and pose a significant threat to them with Fire Blast. The possibility of Explosion and the potential for other options like Stab Sludge Bomb can make sets like this awkward to switch in against as well. Blissey and Snorlax are usually very solid counters to special attackers, but against Weezing, they can struggle with the threat of Explosion. Thunder is another offensive option to consider on Weezing that can punish bulky water types like Suicune and Melodic, who might think they're safe. Movesets and EV spreads on Weezing can greatly vary because of all the different directions you can go in with it, and there is some real nuance to using this Pokemon. A weird looking set like Hidden Power Fighting, Fire Blast, Will-O-Wisp, Explosion, for example, could actually be a good fit on a very specific team. Weezing can serve as an extra defensive check against something specific, plus an offensive threat and momentum generator at the same time. Weezing is a truly unique presence in Gen 3 OU that skilled players often take advantage of. Sometimes team building is like a puzzle, a balancing act where you want to squeeze in as much overlapping synergy and as many potential little bits of counterplay against certain matchups as you can. And a Pokemon like Weezing may just reveal itself to be that perfect finishing piece to the puzzle. Weezing is not usually a Pokemon you intend to build around, but as you're trying to solve a certain problem in your team, it can evolve into a Weezing team on its own. And to me, that's what makes it a perfectly designed Pokemon. I see a lot of discourse around Pokemon that boils down to whether things are viable or not in a very binary sense. Many people have praised terrestrialization for its ability to make certain Pokemon more viable than they were previously, like Avalugg, who can now change into a superior type than Ice and function a bit better defensively. But at that point, is this Pokemon even Avalugg anymore? Or have you just transformed it into yet another generic, bulky water type? I'm not as concerned simply with whether my favorite guy is viable, but why they are viable. They could easily make Leedian more viable by creating Mega Leedian and giving it way higher stats. And now my favorite fellow is more viable. But he's more viable for a very boring reason. Weezing is viable because it's actually unique. It stands out from every other Pokemon in the game. It has a set of tools and properties not offered by anything else and is the perfect example of an effective poison type in a world where poison types suck. But it's also not overpowered in the slightest. It doesn't have completely min-maxed stats or have every tool in the world. Its stab type has limitations, and the offensive threat it poses comes from options with advantages but also drawbacks. It can't fit every tool on the same set. And on top of that, its visual design and name are simple and creative. This isn't the kind of Pokemon that's going to be a widely beloved fan favorite, but it is perfectly evocative of the poison type, and just weird enough to add some magic and wonder to the games. Weezing is a beautiful Pokemon inside and out, and I hope you're all having an excellent Weezing Wednesday today.